House Committee on Basic Education 2020-2021 Budget Defense with the Universal Basic Education. In presentation of the budget, the Executive Secretary, Dr. Ahmed Bobboyi, lamented over the poor release of funds to the ministry. He also went further to explain how the government has abandoned the basic education, which is the bedrock of education in the country.
In the sense that if you look at some of these key problems that we have, some of the challenges that you find at the state level, we really feel that, in terms of education, we are not doing that much to make a real difference. We come here, we are given 110 billion. We give the states 50-something billion. But before we even get to that, please, let's look at constitutional responsibilities initially. Who is supposed to do what within this particular system? And we need to also look at even the preamble of UBEC Act, the UBE Act. It's the federal government that is trying to intervene to help states and local governments to ensure that they discharge their responsibility. Because under the shadows of the Constitution, primary education is a local government affair. Secondary education is a state affair. And therefore, the federal government doesn't own a single school. It doesn't employ a single teacher. And at the end of the day, we have to go back to understand the nature of those responsibilities that are there. And to understand, about how resources are disbursed and how resources should be used to make a difference. But the question I want to ask, the resources we are putting forward, can they take care of the problem? Can they take care of the problem? Instead of deceiving ourselves that, everybody is doing his best, perhaps based on those resources. But the state does not add a single kobo. 95 or 98% of states do not add a single kobo to that matching grant counterpart fund that they access. It's taken for granted that this is okay. Now, you better bring 1.5 billion. The state is bringing 1.5 billion. You have 3 billion. I had a discussion with a senior official who said, look here, my school is dilapidated. And I said, okay, but what can we do? Go and assess it. It was assessed. It required 250 million to put the school into shape. And then 250 million, I told him, okay, now 250 million. Do you know how much the state is really budgeting for education, for that basic education infrastructure? It's 3 billion. The state that we have, that I'm talking about, had 1,950 schools. And so the maximum you can do per year, maybe 100 schools, even if the amount that is expended is low. At the end of the day, we have to face the reality that there will be systematic decay of our school infrastructure. There's no for the 3 billion, isn't it, that you are putting to make the difference that you are looking for. So this is a challenge as a nation. How do we move forward? How much of our GDP are we spending on the basic education sector compared to even African countries? Nigeria has now gone beyond 1.5 to about 2% of its GDP as far as basic education is concerned. So I think it's a real question. It's a question that we have to address if we want to move forward. But we also have to understand the challenges that are there, isn't it? The resources that are available, and so on and so forth, isn't it? And then come up with realistic.
Some other members also show their concerns by asking questions.
We are busy talking about training teachers. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, the chairman of this committee has spoken strongly with regards to out-of-school children. The UBE has failed in its primary mandate, as far as your budget is concerned, to address the major reason that brought about your establishment in 1999.
There is a question on educational imbalance, which you allot 2% to in your disbursements. What is the criteria as regards this educational imbalance? How do we arrive at you said you qualify for this funds.
In conclusion, the chairman committee, Honorable Julius Inhovere, also expresses his feelings in an interview had with him.
Look inwards and see if the structure of operation, their prioritization are in order. Because if your house is not in order, you cannot deliver on your mandate. So that's the first thing we try to do. Second, we look at the budget performance for the last year. How did they spend the money that was given to them? This is public funds. And we try to identify areas where we think they have underperformed and find out why. The third is to see to what extent we can help with improving on the budget. Essentially, in some areas they need more money. These are educational agencies in the educational sector. And it's a post-COVID era. We're talking of refurbishing, rehabilitating, refocusing the schools. Many of them, of the schools, have no basic facilities, no water, no toilets, no chairs. Some teachers have not had any retraining for 5-10 years. You also find this, we're talking of new technology. How do people study without necessarily coming into a classroom? So we're looking at all of that to see how we can encourage the agencies to incorporate these into their budgeting so as to assist our educational institutions. Finally, the problem is everything seems to be at the federal level. Education is on the concurrent list. But I think a lot of the problem is at the local and state levels. Majority of the local governments are not trying at all. They are behaving as if they are not responsible for education in their domains. Some state governments won't even access their own funds that is available. You just pay your counterpart fund and get your money. They don't give it to you back. They're not doing it. There are states where new schools have not been built in 2-3 years. But they just build only in the capital city so that visitors can see it. But 10 minutes outside the capital city is embarrassment. Children are still sitting on the floor. They're still writing on the wall, the so-called blackboard. They have no textbooks, nothing. Some schools have 2 teachers and a headmaster. We should be embarrassed. So the committee is concerned about technology, number 2, quality staff, instruction, and then the incentives for the teachers. Because when you want people to teach and do the best they can, and there was a time it was like that in this country. When we went to school, primary, secondary, university in this country, we used to look at our teachers and dream of being like them. Nobody dreams of being like their teachers today. So funding is a big problem. The federal government has to do something about it, but the states and local governments, it's not enough to announce a big sum. It is the releases and monitoring and ensuring that these monies are expended appropriately. That is where the challenge usually is.
Comfort Olayinka, Dajik TV News.